interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Elizabeth was sure as soon as her husband came home and ate a plate of her specialty borscht with smoked brisket, they immediately reconciled. Borscht was her best dish, and cooking it was always akin to meditation for her. Fry the onions until golden. Slice the cabbage so thin that it was almost like threads. Add a pinch of sugar right after the tomato paste to balance the flavor. Harvey always ate borscht with great appetite and joked that it tasted like a restaurant. And then sometimes, if he was in a good mood, he would sit his wife on his lap and say that he loved her very much, that he was so lucky to have her. Only lately such closeness between the spouses had not happened for a long time, and Elizabeth began to think that she had forgotten what it was like when her own husband hugged her. And it all began with the fact that they quarreled, and Elizabeth did not understand whether that occasion was worth it to forget everything that was between them. After all, she was genuinely worried about her husband, so she found out how he was doing at work, tried to give useful advice. In general, Harvey did not like to share with her the details of his affairs, but she knew that he had parked a working truck unsuccessfully, so it happened that it drove into the chief's car, which from the collision of the bumper became like a crumpled tin can. Harvey was only partly to blame. That day the asphalt in the city suddenly froze, and the janitor, responsible for the order, specifically in that parking lot, was completely unprepared for it. But the chief did not want to listen to anything and shook with Harvey compensation, which was equal to the salary for 2 months. Elizabeth could understand why her husband's mood became disgusting, but could not understand. And on her why get angry, and only much later, looking back, she realized it was another grain of sand in the avalanche that their family relationship was collapsing altogether. But right now Elizabeth was not going to give up so easily. That's why she cooked her specialty borscht. Looking at the clock, her husband was late. Finally, it was time to throw in a pot of crushed garlic and leave it on a hot stove, let it infuse. Elizabeth took off her apron and hurried to her room to change. She chose a fitted dress of sky blue silk with small white polka dots. She twirled in front of the mirror, ran her palms over her figure, evaluating herself. Then she took off the headband, unraveled 2 spirals of hair, pulling them apart into careless curls, went over them lightly with a comb and added a little crimson and scarlet lipstick to her lips. Now she was good. From the hallway came the sound of keys jingling outside the front door. Harvey was back. Elizabeth, with the joy of a bird ready to greet the sun at the dawn of a new day, fluttered out to greet him. Her heart beat joyfully as it had the day he had asked her to be his wife. There had been misunderstandings, resentments. Let them be. But it's time to leave that in the past. And today it's time to start anew. How could it be otherwise? Elizabeth smiled as Harvey gave her a renewed life, feeling she had never known she had, and for that she was eternally grateful. Now they would make up and all would be well. A smile froze on Elizabeth's face when a girl walked through the door, ahead of her husband. A short, tight black dress, legs in boots, and black tights with stiletto heels as thin as matchsticks. The girl smelled of a sweet, sweet perfume. She was smiling too, but she suddenly turned down when she saw the landlady. "You said you were alone," she turned to the man. Harvey grinned crookedly, the way he did when he'd had a stiff drink. His palm slapped the girl's lower back, pushing her forward. "And I'm alone. It's like furniture. Don't mind me. Go to the bedroom and get undressed." Elizabeth felt so strange, or rather aloof, as if she was forced to watch a movie, and she didn't understand the plot yet, but only guessed that it was an abomination. "What are you staring at?" Her husband swayed, leaned his shoulder against the wall, awkwardly pulling off his shoes. "Did you think I'd put up with your antics? Did you think I'm not a man? You're not a woman." He spat out angrily and pulled down his pants after his shoes. If it weren't for the context of the situation, it would have looked comical. A man in a sweater, jacket, hat, and underpants with frogs. Harvey sniffed his nose and smelled the aroma of soup. "Go on, finish your borscht and stay put. I'll finish it." He grinned again. "I'll eat. And you think I decided to make room in my bunk, so you have no right to complain." With these words, he went through the corridor and slammed the door to the bedroom, where the girl had hidden earlier, so hard that the plaster almost fell from the ceiling. Elizabeth stood in the same place, frozen as if her whole body had turned to stone. She tried to think, But instead, she felt her heart pounding with frightening clarity, and it felt like her heart was going to jump out of her chest. She raised her hand and pressed her palm to her neck, as if checking what was in the way, why she couldn't breathe normally, what was choking her. Her cheeks became wet. Elizaveta wondered which of her neighbors had a dog whining so pitifully, long and lonely, bursting into tears. And the next moment she realized that it was she herself who was howling. And in general, she is already sitting on the floor, hunched over. And it seems that if it gets even a little bit worse, although it seems that there is nowhere else, she will simply disappear, dissolve from her grief, evaporate like a fog. But it didn't happen in a minute, not after 10. The stove beeped from the kitchen, announcing that the buns with herbs, which she was going to serve with the borscht, were baked. She rose. Sounds came to her ears. A mishmash of sounds from the bedroom, and Elizabeth wondered aloofly how good her hearing was. She sighed, now without hysterics, evenly and deeply, so that her chest became tight and painful from the air. She exhaled, closed her eyes, squeezed tightly. Her husband had not cheated. He did what was far worse. He just killed everything that was between them. Walking over to the hallway closet, Elizabeth ripped its sash sideways and pulled her coat off the hanger. Smoky gray from a sale. She ran her fingers along the sleeve in light lint. It was the first thing Harvey had ever bought her. It seemed like an eternity since then, but in fact it had been just over a year since she had met him, since he had almost literally picked her up on the street, scared, lost, and so alone. Elizabeth put on her coat. She had recovered a bit since then, the clothes barely fitting together at her chest and waist. Now to put on her shoes, brown flat-toe boots, and these are the first shoes she bought on her first paycheck. As she remembers now, it was in the spring. She then worked at a cheese and sausage stand. Elizaveta reached for her purse. She stood on a pedestal in the hallway. Her cell phone was there. A simple push-button. Harvey had said she didn't need a smartphone, and she didn't mind. She even liked such a simple thing. Also in her purse were some papers, a handful of change. Elizabeth opened the door, crossed the threshold, and turned around. She saw the bedroom door, and for a moment in her head there was a completely crazy picture of the door swinging open. Her husband running out and shouting that he had nothing with the night butterfly, that he couldn't, because he only loved her, his wife. But this, of course, was only a silly fantasy. And then Elizabeth went out of the door. She didn't lock it, left her keys on the nightstand, because she wasn't going to come back here. And in general, she wasn't going to exist in Harvey's life anymore. I went downstairs. Her feet quickly counted down the steps, first, second, third, fourth, 24th, and so on. The counting helped her focus a little, and when Elizabeth, walking away down the street from the house, dialed the number she'd sworn she'd never call, her fingers were no longer trembling, and her voice sounded steady when the other side answered, when she said only 3 words. "Hi, pick me up." Harvey had admitted to himself 1,000 times he couldn't drink, but lately he'd been drinking more and more because his job wasn't going well. Loans were pressing, his wife had forgotten her place, his parents were nagging. Well, there were plenty of reasons to drink. Alcohol gave ease, a kind of dash oblivion, but then came the reckoning. And not just in the form of a headache. Harvey felt disgusting. And he remembered after the libations, that was as if a life stood before his eyes, his uncle Vadim, who died of white fever and had managed to do so much damage to his relatives that they preferred to forget everything about him, and even his grave was abandoned. Vadim nodded approvingly to his nephew, saying, "Keep up the good work, and soon you'll compare with me, or even surpass me." The sun was pouring through the slit in the curtains, and it seemed to stab him in the brain with a cutting pain. Harvey groaned, wrinkled his nose, and turned away. He ducked his nose into a shoulder tattooed crookedly, as if a butterfly had been crushed. The man opened his eyes and sat up. Then he pushed the girl to wake her up. "What do you want?" Rubbing her eyes, she yawned. "What are you doing here? You said to stay till morning. Do you want some in the morning?" With a carnivorous, professional smile, she reached for him, but Harvey flinched and fell to the floor with the blanket. "I don't want anything. Go away." As you say, the girl shrugged her shoulders like a man long accustomed to any mood swings and whims of clients. "You've paid me everything. Don't worry," she added, taking his fussing about picking up the scattered clothes on his own account. because he had taken the crumpled bills out of his pockets yesterday. But Harvey was just getting dressed. "Go away," he shouted. "I'm coming." The girl wrinkled her nose and dressed quickly. She sighed, because the client turned out to be generous, though he gave money yesterday without counting. But he was not going to treat her to a cup of coffee or breakfast. However, taking into account that somewhere in the apartment his wife was, it would be awkward to linger here, even with her shameless profession. So the girl looked out of the bedroom, careful where the wife was. She'd been in a lot of trouble, but she wasn't going to add to that collection by attacking a jealous woman. Although judging by the reaction of the client's wife last night, she was the kind of woman who put up with everything from her pants in the house. Harvey tumbled out of the bedroom as the front door slammed. The call girl he picked up off the highway left. "Elizabeth?" he called out. In addition to the bedroom, the apartment still had a hall where he now stood, another small room, and of course the kitchen and bathroom. Harvey walked around the apartment. He looked out on the balcony as if his wife might be lurking behind boxes, bags of junk he couldn't remember. Back in the kitchen, Harvey drank a cup of water. His throat was dry. Then he looked into the pot, and the borscht, which had not yet had time to sour, smelled deafeningly appetizing. "What a bastard I am," Harvey told himself, and drank more water. It was clear as day Elizabeth had taken offense and left. But where to? To his parents, of course. There seemed to be nowhere else for her to go. Harvey paused with the phone in his hands. Oh, how he was going to get it this time. Like never before. Because they'd had spats before, even fights, but never like this. Never like this. And it was really bad that he couldn't remember if it had happened with that girl. Like he passed out as soon as he entered the bedroom. Or was it? Because why else would she be in bed with him with no clothes on? Gritting his teeth in frustration, Harvey exhaled as if he were about to take a drink and dialed the number. After talking to his mother, Harvey sat down on a stool and thought hard. The wife wasn't there. His mother had no idea what had happened between them. She was talking about all sorts of silly things. About the fact that it was absolutely necessary to dig up the land at the cottage and bring dolomite flour because its acidity was wrong. About the fact that she had promised Elizabeth a recipe for peach pie, and please let her call, and she would dictate. Harvey's stomach rumbled as he skipped lunch yesterday and didn't eat dinner, but drank without snacking, and now his body was insistently making him realize what a wrong choice it had been. Only now Harvey could not eat. He began to call acquaintances, friends, and from whom he could hints and direct text asked. And if they do not have Elizabeth? Naturally, the acquaintances and friends quickly began to suspect something. At least Harvey was sure of it. "Did you have a fight?" Jacob asked. Jacob was his best friend, but he was the last person Harvey called, simply because he felt a desperate need to share his problem. And Elizabeth couldn't be at Jacob's house, because Jacob had moved to Spain years ago to live in Spain and then traveled around the world working in resorts. But that didn't stop them from being friends. "A little." "Have you been drinking?" Jacob said. "I told you you didn't look like a human being when you were drunk," Jacob said. Harvey rolled his eyes. Ever since Jacob had stopped drinking at 18, after the first drink he'd had, he seemed to have made it his mission to bring everyone he could reach to a sober, sane lifestyle. "Did you call your parents?" "I did," Harvey sighed. "If she'd come to them, my mother would have had my ass." "When did she leave?" Jacob continued to ask, or, as it seemed to Harvey, interrogate Jacob. "I don't know," Harvey mumbled. "We had a fight last night. I got up this morning and she was gone." "What are we gonna do with you?" Jacob was rustling things on the other side, and Harvey realized he was going to. He remembered that the other day Jacob had gone to work far away again and had found himself a damn job on some island in the Caribbean, and he was going to winter there and make some money. Harvey didn't envy him, though. He wouldn't have the nerve, and his pride wouldn't allow him to serve some rich man, no matter how much he was paid. "If he doesn't show up," Jacob continued, "we'll have to file a missing persons report." "What's missing?" "She just got mad and ran away." "All sorts of things happen in the world," Jacob said seriously. "I'm sorry, of course, but you got such a wife." "You got the right one." Harvey grinned, still hungover and angry. "Don't get smart," Jacob snorted. "It doesn't matter what she had before you. The important thing is how you live your life. A wife like that. Anyway, you're a fool. I got things to do." You better go look for her and buy her, I don't know, flowers or something. Candy, or better yet, chocolate-covered fruit. Get on your knees and tell her you love her. Anyway, I get it. Harvey couldn't listen to this idiotic romantic advice any longer because in his opinion, life was simpler and women should be able to talk to you in a straightforward and honest way, not like Jacob, who was still unmarried, suggested. When he finished talking, Harvey decided to stuff himself with some food just to keep his body working. He poured out the stale borscht, cursing himself. His wife was gone, and a whole pot of deliciousness was gone. That's two. In the refrigerator, there was a dried-up piece of cheese, and in the oven there were buns with spicy greens. Harvey chewed, sipping his tea, and thought, where had Elizabeth gone? How to find her, and the main question was how to fix what he had done and get his wife back. In his 28, Harvey lived in his own apartment. Parents, after he graduated from university, traded his 3-bedroom in the center of the city and gave his son a living space with the aim that when his wife appears and children will not have to get into the mortgage. By diploma, Harvey was supposed to become a high school English teacher, but it did not work out because it was his mother who wanted him to go to the teachers, and this desire was explained by the fact that she herself had once traded this work for the status of housewife. Only Harvey realized that to sit in classes and teach a bunch of kids modern he cannot. It's not his and that's it. So, not without a huge scandal of course, he began to look for a place in life. He tried to work in a car repair shop and even did well, but then got bored as it was and went to the drivers. Now he was delivering goods around the city, but in the future he was looking forward to a long-haul trucker's business trips. Harvey liked that. No one stands over the soul, the road is winding, and there is no daily routine. In general, Harvey was in no hurry to start a serious relationship, to get married, but as his mother would say, fate had its own way. Just one rainy, gray autumn day, driving to the store where they ordered goods, Harvey suddenly grabbed the vision. That's how it stuck. A fragile female figure. A blonde woman with long curls that were wet and made her look like a lost mongrel was sitting on a bench, her face hidden in her palms. "Are you all right, girl?" Harvey asked, coming up to her. She flinched and looked up. The eyes were huge green, and though Harvey had never been prone to poetic nonsense in his life, he compared them to deer eyes. They were brown though, actually. "I don't know," replied the stranger, who looked to be about 23 or 25. "No more." "Thank you," she added, and smiled shyly. Her voice was beautiful, like her whole self. She had an accent, but Harvey didn't pay attention to that. "Thank you for what? You're the first person to ask me that." "Well, so." Harvey was confused and looked around. It didn't look like the girl was expecting anyone. "You're not all right," he said, and then held out his hand to her. "You'll catch cold in here. Let's have some coffee, shall we?" She agreed, and he took her to the nearest cafe, or rather, it was a lentil shop, but the stranger enjoyed it all. She moaned with pleasure as she sank her teeth into the first hot burger. The meat juice ran down her chin and Harvey handed her a napkin. "I've never had one of these before." "Yeah." He was a little surprised. "So what's wrong with you?" "Nothing," she shrugged. "That's all. I decided to start all over again. Came to this town and..." She stopped talking, returning her attention to the chowders. Harvey nodded understandingly. "It's life, all right. People today are always running away from something, looking for something." Earlier in Harvey's life, everything was very simple. He made relationships with women simple. He got acquainted easily, then broke up, because he didn't need anything serious. But here, it was like being caught in a hurricane. Harvey realized that he was, no, not in love. It would be too simple a word to describe his feelings for this amazing young woman. That feeling was like a need, even like an addiction. He realized that he felt differently around Elizabeth. It was easy to laugh and be silent with her. She could talk, it seemed, about anything in the world. She was not a talker who pours herself about herself. She was more interested in listening to what others had to say. But naturally, questions arose about who she was, where she came from. Elizabeth opened up about that. It turned out that she grew up in a family of immigrants who left for England back in the early 90s. Her parents died when Elizabeth was only 14 and she, by the decision of her guardians, had to spend the years until adulthood in a private boarding house in Switzerland. You mean the Institute for Noble Maidens? Harvey grinned when she told him about it. A terrible place, Elizabeth corrected him and looked at him in such a way that he stopped laughing at once. One is always alone there, and one is always washed over. It turned out that as soon as she turned 17, her brother came for her. He was 4 years older, and somehow he managed to get enough power to be able to take her sister away. But after a few more years, Elizabeth realized that she and her brother were different people and decided to return to where her parents had once lived. Harvey listened and wondered what it was like to leave everything behind and come and start over in an environment he had never lived in before. He did not ask what Elizabeth was doing abroad. He had enough of her few phrases about her brother trying to find his place in life, trying to do business, but it did not work out, and now she was at a loss. Elizabeth admitted that she and her brother had quarreled and parted. They became complete strangers. Soon after their acquaintance, it turned out that Elizabeth had money with a sparrow's nose. She rented an apartment and thought she had to get a job, but she had no experience, which would have come in handy because there, being abroad, as Harvey realized, Elizabeth worked as a tourist guide. There is little or no tourism in our town. Harvey shared his knowledge of local life with the girl. There are tourists, but to the nature, there are mountains nearby, forests. It is, not beaches with museums to show. It is, training is needed. And we have only one travel agency. No two. Why don't you try there? But it turned out that Elizabeth had already been there and was told there were no vacancies. She was running out of money to pay her rent for the next month. And then Harvey, realizing that meetings and conversations were not enough for him, proposed. "Marry me," he said it simply, without any of that gallant courtesy. "I will take care of you." Elizabeth froze and looked at him confused, a little frightened. Harvey's heart jumped. Well, purely deer she, as if a truck with lights on rushes, and the deer does not know what to do then. Then she nodded and said yes. Harvey's parents, by the way, the news that their son decided to settle down, took it negatively at first, because they thought it was strange girl came from nowhere. Almost that, and so you can say, it is not clear what kind of person she is. And here is a big deal, marriage. However, time passed, and Harvey's mother, his father, and other relatives changed their minds. Everyone was enchanted with Elizabeth. She turned out to be a girl kind, easy, tactful, intelligent. In general, the family council decided such a bride in the family needed. "What does it matter what happened to a person before?" sighed Kolia's mother. "It happens that people meet their destiny. Get married, my son, and take care of your wife. She's the only one like that." But the closer the wedding got, the more anxious Harvey became. And it was not that his relationship with Elizabeth somehow spoiled. No, with this just everything was fine. She, as they say, looked at his mouth and was happy with the role of future wife. It was just that Harvey suddenly realized that he was not just in love. It was exactly like an addiction. He felt that Elizabeth was able to influence him. And it all began with the fact that she, when one day they were at the market and he argued with a saleswoman who seemed to be trying to cheat with fish, began to grab Harvey by the sleeve and say that there was no need, please, conflicts, because everything can be solved with kindness. "Excuse me," appealed Harvey then to the saleswoman. "I'm sorry, please. I overreacted. My bad." And when they returned home, Harvey felt, here, as if his mother scolded him as a child and made him apologize to adults. Harvey began to feel angry that Elizabeth was trying to control him. He could think of no other name for her actions when she, for example, began to tell him that he should not go to his friend's house in the evening because they were drinking and he would drink, and that was bad for him. It was Harvey's own idea for his wife to stay home and do the housework. That was his position. He is a provider, and she creates coziness, cooks, cleans. "I need a wife, not an educator." He threw it to Elizabeth the first time they fought. Then he apologized, of course. And then everything started to annoy him again. And in the way Elizaveta instructs him, and in general, how she evenly arranges the cans and boxes of food in the locker, how she hangs the towels in the bathroom neatly, like a ruler. And as if I didn't have enough to be nervous about, suddenly my wife got sick. Problems began as Harvey's mother, who was traveling with Elizabeth to clinics, shamefully explained, on the women's side. Elizabeth began to lie down more and more often, complaining of a sore stomach. And then on one far from beautiful day in the evening, when Harvey was hoping for a very pleasant night, she said that the doctor, you see, forbade to perform conjugal duty for the time being. Then Elizabeth seemed to get better, and then she was sick again. Now Harvey was simply living in a mode of poorly concealed irritation, and now it appeared as if he were not married. Because instead of understanding, they tried to teach him, instead of intimacy, a kiss on the cheek. But the last straw was that his father and mother suddenly ran out of money and needed them urgently because the parents accidentally flooded the apartment of the neighbors below. Now, of course, needed money for repairs to forget the whole story, and nerves did not wreck. Then Harvey approached Elizabeth and asked, "And maybe we call your brother, maybe borrow from him on kinship can be." Elizabeth suddenly started crying. She began to say that she had asked Harvey that she wanted to forgive her past. He said that in fact, she was reacting abnormally. He had just asked. He was sick of it all. He was sick of her and his mother trying to tell him how to live his life, like trying to put him on a diet because his blood sugar was too high. Tired that his own wife refuses intimacy, and often not because she is sick, like treated and healthy, but because, you see, no mood. Harvey threatened that he would not tolerate such treatment. The next day, Elizabeth pushed the sugar bowl away from him at breakfast, saying it was not good for coffee. So he got up and left the house without breakfast. And after work, he got drunk. And then he saw this girl in a short skirt on the highway, and he snapped. I decided that I had to teach my wife a lesson, so that she, smart as she is, would know her place. And now, in the morning, came the reckoning. After taking a pill for a headache, Harvey decided to take a nap and then, with a fresh head, so to speak, to think about what to do next. When he woke up, the hands were already past 7 in the evening, and the phone had a dozen missed calls. The pills seemed to help, but when Harvey dialed his mother when she tried to call, there was a reason for the migraine to return. "What the hell are you doing? Where's Elizabeth?" It turned out that family friends had managed to report to her that Harvey was suspiciously asking about his spouse, so he had to tell the truth. Well, part of it was that they'd had a fight, and the next morning Elizabeth was gone. "You should give you a good belt," gloomily said his father, who took the phone from his mother for a while. "Another man would have carried such a wife in his arms, but you. I guess we won't see grandchildren." Harvey wanted to bang his head against the wall. What a mess. And as if an annoying voice in his head was saying, "Have you thought, male dog, that from fun with night butterflies there are diseases? Maybe you've already contracted something nasty." Harvey doggedly surfed the internet for phone numbers of hospitals and horrible morgues. Harvey clutched the phone in his sweaty hands. Hesitating to start calling too vividly, he imagined how he could suddenly be told that yes, there was a woman matching your description. She was in serious condition, or dead. Harvey really didn't like to feel guilty, but right now, this feeling swamping him with guilt seemed so right. Yes, it was his fault. Yes, he's an idiot. Cheating on his wife, in the marital bed, and in front of her. Humiliated her. Destroyed what was there. He went to the kitchen and drank a glass of ice water. It's time. Time to call him. But then the phone played a cheerful tune, announcing a voice message. Harvey jerked, turned it on. Elizabeth, her native voice. Except that's what she was saying. Don't look for it. Parting ways, he'd heard her. She's gone. She's not coming back. Harvey listened to the message a great many times. Everything became clear to him. His marriage was over. Lately, Harvey went to work through force. Everything was annoying. He thought about quitting and looking for something in some other place. The day after the betrayal fell on a day off, and it passed, as if bogged deeper and deeper in the swamp. Floundering and get out did not work. And when the new day, Harvey did not go, rushed to work because he knew it would forget about all this, will pull into the familiar routine, and at least for a while, but will be not so cloudy, not so sick at heart. However, of course, it was only a temporary respite. Harvey explained himself to his parents, his mom, dad, and then his cousin and some others. Anyway, he wasn't the only one listening to the message from Elizabeth. His mother was crying, his father was cursing, his relatives were shaking their heads and looking reproachful. Harvey felt strange. He wanted to rush between all these people and ask for advice on what to do, how to get his wife back. Or he wanted to take some of them by the scruff of the neck, shake them hard, and demand an answer to why they thought they had the right to teach him? Or do they live perfect lives themselves, without any mistakes, and have nothing to be ashamed of? Naturally, he tried to call Elizabeth, text and voice messages. But on the other side, there were only long beeps. "Daughter, my heart is breaking." Harvey's mom appealed to her daughter-in-law's kindness. "Honey, at least talk to me. How are you? Where are you? What's wrong with you? Harvey, I know he's a stranger to you now, but you're like our own." And one day, Elizabeth answered. Harvey found out when his mother called him and started yelling into the phone. And it wasn't happy news. It turned out that yes, Elizabeth misses her too, her mother-in-law. She is grateful to be welcomed as her own. But no, she can't go back. As she asked me to tell you, it's too late. And she also asked to convey that she is grateful to Harvey for giving her days of happiness and love once upon a time. She also wanted me to tell you that she would try to get a divorce soon. "You have a heart of stone," his mother told him, sobbing, and Harvey took the receiver away from his ear, wincing. His wife loved him. She was faithful, kind. You'll never have another like her. Harvey didn't immediately realize why they were looking at him like that. He was standing in line at the cash register of a gas station convenience store, and he didn't realize that he was listening to all this by accidentally turning on the speaker on his smartphone, which means that everyone around him heard everything perfectly well. Flushed with shame, Harvey threw some bills on the counter and muttered that he didn't need change, grabbed his coffee and sandwich, and ran out into the street. How sick he felt. Meanwhile, time was passing, time was flying. October was coming to an end and autumn was taking over the city more and more, ripping off the furiously variegated leaves, exposing the sharp branches, pouring icy rains, and as if sucking the colors out of the surrounding reality. "How are you?" Harvey Jacob called one day. "How do you think?" Harvey grinned grimly. He was standing at the stove, pouring the contents of a jar labeled canned borscht. "Dine at home." "Okay, I get it," Jacob coughed. "Let's not pour salt on the wound, as they say." "Are you working?" Harvey asked indifferently, stirring what was spilling into the pot. The cabbage was suspiciously faded and seemed rubbery. "I'm working," replied his friend with genuine cheerfulness. "It's so beautiful here. The palm trees, the sea, and the crowd." Jacob rolled his eyes, but he couldn't understand his friend, with whom he'd shared a sandbox. What kind of joy is it to hop around with a tray between rich people who, from their millions, which, by the way, may have been obtained dishonestly, give you crumbs like a sparrow crumbles a bun in the park? The girls, I'll tell you, top class. They're all models, Jacob went on. "Yeah," Harvey said, and remembering that he needed to salt the brew, he reached for the salt shaker. The plastic lid of the salt shaker suddenly snapped off, and the contents spilled thickly into the pot. Harvey was ready to cry out. Everything was falling out of his hands. He couldn't cook, could he? He grinned mirthfully. "My mom used to cook before, and then after he moved out, he'd eat half-finished meals and go to her place for lunches, because my parents lived across the street. Then Elizabeth cooked. Variety, delicious, and now I'm on my own. I could have dropped in on my mother, but I didn't have the strength to listen to her heavy sighs about her ruined marriage. We're having a picnic on the yacht tonight," Jacob said. "I'm off. I got work to do." Harvey put the phone away, fished out the salt shaker lid. He waited for the time indicated on the label. The borscht was edible, though oversalted, but it was nothing like the borscht Elizabeth had made. Men don't cry, Harvey told himself, and sliced the bread thickly and sat down to eat. Although the thermometer showed 32 degrees of heat and the time was just approaching noon, Jacob did not feel fatigued, but was full of fresh energy. Yes, he was fortunate enough to genuinely love his work, and he saw no reason to be ashamed of it. His mother, by the way, did not approve of the fact that her son, who had a higher education, and even a law degree by the way, was working as a waiter, but Jacob was fine with it. "Your cocktail, sir," he said in decent English to the man in the white suit. He nodded absent-mindedly and took a glass filled with tropical fruit juices mixed with coffee and crushed ice. The yacht froze on the mirror-like surface of the Caribbean Sea, reflecting the cloudless sky. There was a flock of dolphins tumbling about. People on the yacht were deciding serious business matters, and big numbers were being talked about. Jacob caught the words £6 million sterling, but he didn't care, or rather, he didn't seem to be listening. And even less did he show that he knew some of the people he served drinks and appetizers to very well. He was used to behaving at certain times like a man for whom the beautiful life is close by, just like those dolphins over there, but you only touch it lightly and make sure to hold on to the place allotted to you by fate. "Miss," Jacob smiled, handing the glass of chia seed smoothie to the girl. "She's new here," Jacob thought, noticing the uneven tan of her slender body, the charms of which were clearly visible under the light lace sundress. Her face was hidden by the large sunglasses and the shadow of her wide-brimmed hat. Jacob turned around for a moment as he walked away with the tray. How interesting this time. Jacob whistled a cheerful tune under his breath and hurried to the kitchen to prepare the freshest oysters, delivered by private plane from New England, especially for the lunch of the people on the yacht. Time went on and on. Harvey at first waited with horror for the moment when he would have to sign the divorce papers. For some reason, it seemed to him that before their separation would receive, so to speak, official confirmation, there was still a chance to fix something. But the documents did not come. And in time, he managed to relax, even stop thinking about it 10 times a day. Especially that twisted family affairs now at his parents in the apartment broke plastic windows and had to help his father, who in this case a little bit smart, but needed help, because his mother flatly refused to call professional workers, arguing that there is no reason to spend money when the family as many as 2 not armless men are. But these windows were still flowers compared to the task that his mother set for Harvey one day. "Natalie is counting on you to help her," Mom said, slamming her palm down on the table. Harvey rolled his eyes. What a story. His cousin had just gotten divorced. Divorced, by the way, because of her husband's many strings. Husband, who was unlucky enough to work in the firm, the boss of which was a model family man and from his subordinates expected a decent way of life, hurried as any to whitewash himself, and that the former did not carry the revelations of his love affairs and people, threw to her feet generous payoff, and even ahead for 6 months paid alimony at the couple was a 4-year-old son named Demian. And so the sister decided that the divorce she wants to celebrate a trip to the sea. The child left on native babysitters was enough, and herself was going to divorce. "Mom, and why me?" stretched Harvey, who sincerely did not understand where he was pulled. Mom sighed and began to chew on it. Turned out that Natalie alone is afraid to go abroad, afraid that it is not safe for a young and pretty woman. Harvey held back a chuckle. It always seemed to him that it is almost every member of the male sex is not safe next to his sister is. She's a hurricane and a little harpy if not in spirit. Then his mother added that Harvey himself, by the way, was beginning a legal vacation, and there was nothing to sulk at home. He too needed to unwind. And besides, it turned out that Natalie originally wanted to fly with her girlfriend, but she could not due to family reasons, and the travel agency does not want to return the money and to argue with them for a long time, and it turns out that not to waste the good. Departure was scheduled in a week. Rest was planned on one of the islands in the Caribbean Sea, in a hotel with 4 stars and all-inclusive program. "Go, son," Harvey winked at his father. "If your mother would let me go, I'd love to. Go, take a vacation." His father winked at him. "It's a young man's business." "Shut up, you lecture." My wife jokingly swung at my father. "Anyway, Harvey, pack your things. You already have a passport, by the way. We didn't have time to go to the sea with Elizabeth." Her mother added quietly. And that's how something turned over in Harvey. He realized that just cannot stand this his vacation next to his relatives to spend, to listen constantly about what he is a worthless ex-husband. What a wife missed. "Okay," said Harvey, rising from the plush chair decorating the living room parents. "Okay, I'm going." By the time the plane took off, Harvey had already regretted his decision and even understood his sister's ex-husband a little, because Natalie, oh, that Natalie, she hadn't changed a bit since kindergarten. She was just as cranky, talkative, stubborn. They once drove halfway home from the airport because she thought she'd forgotten something, but then the allegedly forgotten thing was found in her purse. She made Harvey help dig through her suitcase, opening its gut in the middle of the hall, because she'd forgotten to put something in her carry-on. On the plane, he'd been afraid they'd be disembarked, so fiercely Natalie had argued with a neighboring passenger for him to let her in the window seat. All the time that Natalie did not bother him with conversations, Harvey dozed off. And then, leaving the plane and the airport hall, blinked for a long time at the sun, which seemed unrealistically large and bright, scorching so hot. Finally, they checked into the hotel, where they were assigned adjoining rooms. Natalie began to complain that she was tired from the road, she needed to rest, and since Harvey knew her well enough to realize that she would rest, but would not sleep, and would come to him as an interlocutor and complain about her fate, he decided it was better to leave his room, to walk, to freshen up, and then maybe later, Natalie would be loaded with the impressions of the tropical resort, and she wouldn't have time for him. Harvey put on a shirt of a stupid mottled color and palm trees his mother had bought and given him before the flight. It looked strange, but perhaps it was just right for this place. Having changed his clothes, the man ran out of the room, leaving his sisters grumbling behind the door. On the street, he hurriedly bought a bottle of water, and it was hot. On the territory of the hotel, music rumbled, children squeaked, and voices of animators sounded. This place was well known as a resort for family vacations. Wrinkling his nose, Harvey decided to take a walk nearby. He reached the embankment, stopped, and covered his eyes with the visor of his palm and looked at the sea. It's beautiful. In his childhood, he had only been on it. In his heart, there was something like joy, a free vacation. And why not be happy? Yes, the family fell apart, but it's not an eternity to carry the weight. Having bought a whole coconut, inside of which was splashing tasty water, Harvey wandered along the embankment. On one side of the beach, people were sunbathing. Girls in swimsuits were pleasing to the eye. On the other side, there were shops and tents selling all sorts of things. Harvey stopped at one of them to take a hat, so as not to catch a sunstroke. "Excuse me." As he stepped back, he accidentally bumped some tourists with his shoulder. He didn't answer, but he didn't protest. Harvey wandered lazily onward, and the one he ran into looked after him for a while, and the expression of his face suddenly changed from astonished to joyful, and some kind of cunning, as if this man had planned something insidious and triumphed in advance. In the evening, the brother and sister went to dinner at a local restaurant, which was famous for seafood dishes. Harvey found that he had regained his appetite. After dinner, they decided to walk along the promenade, where there was a lot of excitement, where artists in traditional costumes were performing, music was playing, and under the rhythmic beat of drums, small fireworks were flying up to the sky, and tall torches with garlands of flowers were lighting up everything with warm light. "I want to dance." Natalie threw herself into the midst of the festivities, twirled and laughed. He thought of standing aside, just to watch. But then he was surrounded by girls. Each of the dancers looked like a graceful statue carved out of ebony, each smiling with white teeth like pearls and swaying her hips hypnotizingly. "Is that for me?" Harvey was surprised when he was handed a cocktail on a tray decorated with umbrellas. Thank you," he said, and looked around. Everyone seemed to be getting a drink now, and many of the tourists were holding drinks in their hands. Harvey shrugged, a hospitable feast for vacationers. Why refuse? Maybe it would be easier on the soul. It did become easier after the cocktail, but not on the soul, but in the head, and even in front of the eyes swam. Harvey grabbed the nearest palm tree. The girls swayed synchronously. The horizon line began to fall somewhere. He wanted to say that he was not feeling well. He should go to the room and rest, that he probably had a headache from the sun. But then, with frightening clarity, the guess pierced his brain that something was mixed into the cocktail. But who? What was spiked? Why? And what would happen to him? Thinking all this over, Harvey could not utter a word, and his eyesight was failing him. But he felt someone strong putting his shoulder and dragging him, muttering in English, seemingly explaining something to those around him. Harvey long ago knew English very well, then managed to forget for lack of necessity, but now suddenly remembered and understood. The one who was dragging him jokingly informed the others that his friend had too much alcohol, and that was the state he was in. Harvey's slipping consciousness concluded that he knew no one in this country. No, yes, he did. There is one person, and that's Jacob. Except that the voice of the man dragging him didn't sound like Jacob's. And then Harvey fell into darkness. His body ached like a cold, his head buzzed as if a swarm of bees had settled between his ears. He was also dizzy. Slowly, though, Harvey realized that the floor and everything beneath it was shaking, and he could hear the waves. Right above him were voices now in English, male and female voices. They were arguing. She demanded to explain why he had brought him. He grinned and said that he would tell everything, but only let the future partner come to the senses first. Harvey was very curious about what was going on. It was also disturbing. Finally, he opened his eyes. He realized that he was lying on a wide and low sofa at the stern of a boat, a ship, or rather, judging from what he could see around him, it was a yacht. The sun was rising over the horizon and was blinding, preventing a clear view of the people leaning over him. But the man with the voice familiar from the moment of the kidnapping, Harvey did not like such a wimpy type, a kind of Mr. Tough Guy from an action movie. And the woman, Harvey squinted and thought that he must still be lying awake and dreaming, because that was impossible. Elizabeth? He asked, shocked, recognizing his ex-wife. Elizabeth stood with her arms folded across her chest and her head bowed. It was her, and at the same time it seemed like a stranger in front of him. The girl had visibly lost weight. Her collarbones, knees, and the points of her elbows protruded, but seemed only to emphasize more the gracefulness of her feminine figure. She had cut her hair short and changed the color. Instead of straw blonde, it was now brown with a Cleopatra-style bow. The breeze fluttered the skirt of a black strappy sundress. Wide bands of gold bracelets glittered on her tan wrists. Harvey could have sworn on anything that his wife had never looked more beautiful, and he'd never wanted to touch her so badly, without any erotic overtones, just to make sure she was real. Why did you bring him here? The marvelous vision in the form of his ex-wife snarled, addressing the unpleasant type. What the hell are you doing? Relaxed, the man grinned and opened the door, which had not been visible before, and took out a bottle with transparent contents from the refrigerator. Don't frown, or you'll get wrinkles here. He pointed with his finger. You'll get wrinkles. But I understand. He raised his hands conciliatorily. You're surprised. I was surprised when I saw him too. What an amusing coincidence, I thought. Having said all this, he slammed the bottle against the side of the yacht, knocking off the cap, and held it out to Harvey. Just water. Take a sip. The type grinned. You don't look so good. I didn't call him, blurted out Elizabeth. Now she looked not only indignant and surprised, but also frightened. I don't know what he's doing here, I swear it. Yes, I believe you, shrugged the unpleasant type. Elizabeth, whispered Harvey, holding the bottle in his hand. He just couldn't believe this meeting. He had so much to say to her. He was so absorbed in his impressions that for a few minutes he even put aside the burning question of why he was here and who had kidnapped him. Sighing, Harvey sipped cautiously. Truly, it was water, and he greedily clung to the bottle. So, what do we have? The obscure man sat down on the sofa, spreading his arms out on the board on either side of him. And we just didn't know where to get the right man, but fate had its way. What? No, you're not. That's impossible. We'll bring him back to shore immediately. Elizabeth held out her hand, pointing her finger at Harvey. Don't you dare bring him into this. Why? The man smirked and arched an eyebrow questioningly. From what you've told me about him, he's a good fit for us, and the fact that your ex is just going to make it easier. I hate him. Elizabeth gritted her teeth. You've ruined my whole life. I gave you the golden ticket, baby. You're the one who managed to tear it up and throw it away. But like I said, fortune is on our side. You can make it up to me. Rising, he cast an unreadable glance at the kidnapped man, then lightly, affectionately slapped his palm on Elizabeth's cheek and headed for the interior of the yacht. I'll tell the captain to make another lap around the bay. Meanwhile, you Chad and you. Explain to him what's going on and make it clear that he has no choice. Unless he wants to join our little party, well, you explain to him what you're risking in that case. The last words were strikingly different in intonation from everything that had been said before. They read the coldness and determination of a man who is used to doing things the way he thinks they should be done, and also the readiness to make sure that the people around him, if it so happens to help in this, as well as do not dare to interfere. Hello, Elizabeth said and smiled sadly, sat down next to me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Harvey opened his mouth and closed it. Where to begin? With the confession of what an asshole he was that night and vows that he only needs her, that without her life is a cardboard gray scenery in which he feels like a broken wind-up toy, or the fact that he doesn't know what's going on, what they want him to do, and that he's got a cousin on the beach and must be panicking about losing him. "That's my brother," Elizabeth said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. How did you end up here in the first place?" Harvey replied that he was brought to the islands, and then she nodded and continued, except that what she was saying didn't seem to clarify anything, because Elizabeth was suddenly rambling on about how Harvey should just pretend that he agreed with everything. He didn't need to ask any questions, and then, as soon as the yacht was moored in the harbor, he should rush to the hotel, pick up his sister, and fly home. "What about you?" Harvey asked the most important question of all. "What the hell is going on here? What are you risking if I don't agree to something?" "You're an idiot," Elizabeth said and rubbed her temples, squeezing her eyes shut. "My head hurts. The pills don't help." Then, pulling herself together, she opened her eyes. "Why don't you just get out of here, huh? You seemed fine with us breaking up." "I was wrong." "Oh," she exclaimed. "Do you realize that sounds like a cheap melodrama? Only it's all over between us. I'm sorry that you got into trouble, but you can and you should get out. I'll take care of it myself." Harvey jumped up and caught his wife by the shoulders, turning her around. "I haven't gotten the divorce papers yet, so you're still my wife and I want to know what's going on." "Oh, I see the tough guy is already in uniform. Elizabeth's brother is back on deck. We didn't get a chance to introduce ourselves to each other. Alex, but for friends it's more Alex. So, you didn't tell him anything? Well, my sister's a fool," he added with feigned pity. "She's my wife." Harvey tried to put as much power into his voice as possible, "and I'm not going to let. I know what you've done. Believe me, she wouldn't have left you if you were all white and fluffy, but Hugh. You think there's still chemistry between you? I'm not so sure about that. You know, she could have lived like a queen, been a socialite, but she gave it all up for that. What did you say back then? Independence. Do you know how many times I asked her to come back? But she chose to be a hackneyed housewife. So much potential buried. So what happened?" Alex waved his hands. "She's back where she belongs. And the fact that you suddenly appeared, well, let's just say it's a funny life accident. But you hurt my sister," Alex gloomed. "It seems to me that you didn't always treat her well either," Harvey answered. "Maybe." Alex bowed his head thoughtfully. "Only I have the right to do that. I took care of her, took her out of the orphanage of crazy saints and gave her everything, taught her everything. And what have you done for her? Put her in the kitchen making borscht? Please stop it," Elizabeth shouted. "Stop it, both of you." "Okay, really." Alex took a deep breath in and exhaled. "Let's calm down and talk seriously. What's going on here?" Harvey asked. "$1 million deal." Alex grinned. The sun, which came out of the horizon, was beginning to blaze. Dolphins were tumbling in their games again not far from the yacht. The shoreline was decorated with lush greenery and snow-white walls of the city buildings, mostly with tiled roofs. But Harvey didn't notice all this beauty. He listened, and the further he listened, the more it seemed to him that now he was being told the script of some Hollywood thriller, but not the events of real life. But it seemed to be real life, and that made him feel bad. It turned out that Elizabeth's brother had been in bad company since his youth. However, he didn't call them bad, but according to the story they were, because these guys were running illegal sports car races, but that was their first and, so to speak, their main activity. And also it sometimes stole things from rich people for other rich people. That is, they performed exclusive orders of a specific nature while traveling around the world. The clients were mostly from South America and the Middle East, as well as Southeast Asia. Harvey swallowed nervously. Now it was clear why Elizabeth was running away from her old life. His brother did not hide that he was preparing a special place for his little sister, because she could be useful to such a team, including through feminine charm, the art of seduction. But it so happened that Elizabeth had no other family and friends except Alex. In general, Harvey was not strong in understanding psychology, but here he understood it seems to be an addiction, the desire to return to the only close person. Naturally, Elizabeth all these years knew what Alex does, but he was her own brother. That's why she kept quiet. And when Harvey betrayed her love so cruelly, Elizabeth, of course, turned to her brother, and he welcomed her lost little sister with open arms. Except he was expecting a show of gratitude in return, and it seems now Elizabeth had some business to attend to. It was unclear to Harvey at first, but why wouldn't she just say no to her brother? After all, he wouldn't harm his own sister, but then he realized he would. Alex had said that if Elizabeth refused, then, unfortunately, a very powerful man would know that she was involved in the disappearance of the diamond necklace from his safe. What nonsense! Harvey exclaimed. She's not a thief. I know that, sighed Alex. You know it. But the owner of the diamonds is sure that such a person as my sister, who suddenly came back to me, can't have nothing to do with it. You see, she lived with you for, what is it, a year? So insignificant compared to the amount of time she spent with me. Do you think he'll believe she was here by accident after her husband cheated? Ridiculous. Look at her. Alex suddenly grabbed Elizabeth by the waist, pulled her to him, and with the other hand grabbed her chin and forced her to lift her head. What kind of an idiot would believe that such a beautiful woman could be cheated on? No man could resist her. So, the poor girl has no excuse why she's here, except that she's involved in the necklace theft. What kind of brother are you if you're willing to frame your own sister? Harvey began. I didn't create that rumor. Alex smirked. But why should I if Elizabeth turns out to be ungrateful and refuses to help, disprove it? After all, she was the one who set me up when she ran away. She called me from Germany and cried, begging me to apologize and let me go. You wanted me to sleep with that bastard from Colombia. I didn't mean anything to you even then. Elizabeth pushed her brother away. It seemed like a small thing, but now she was closer to Harvey than to him, and she could have moved to the other side of the boat. And yet, you called me when you realized you were alone. The three of them were silent for a while. A few seagulls circled above the yacht, squawking longingly, and then Alex continued. It turned out that the priceless necklace belonging to Mr. John Smith was stolen by some business partner, James Richter, who had long ago offended him. The reason for the long ago offense, as Alex explained, had nothing to do with everything that was going on now. The owner of the jewelry treasure, naturally, began to dig in search of the villains who had executed such an order for Richter, because he could not have acted on his own. Mr. Smith believed that dealing with the customer of the theft was one thing, and he would deal with it later and carefully. But finding the one who stole the diamonds and punishing them according to the richness of his own imagination was quite another. I don't know why he thought that it was me and my guys who stole the necklace, shrugged Alex. It seems that someone is taking such an elaborate revenge on us. Maybe competitors. And here, what a sadness. There's almost nothing left of the former team. In this business, people like to retire early while they're still alive. I tried to tell Smith, of course, that we had nothing to do with it, and he said there's a chance to make it right, prove your innocence, and redeem ourselves if it was us. All we had to do was return the necklace to its rightful owner. What's that got to do with me? Harvey asked. He asked the question, but only had a nasty feeling that the answer already knew. You're going to help us do it? See, Alex nodded. Like I said, the team has thinned out. Right now it's just me and her, and one other guy. A newbie, but promising. We need one more person. But why me? Actually, I was thinking of picking someone from the locals. There are guys who are good at special cases, if you know what I mean, smirked Alex. Harvey understood him perfectly well. He was talking about some bandits. But you see, that's the problem. It's a risky business. There's more than $1 million at stake. There's a risk that the new guy on the team decides he can take the whole pie, And then I saw you. Can you believe what a great coincidence that is? And I thought, hey, why not this guy? Elizabeth told me a lot about you. You have all the skills I need. What skills? Harvey mumbled in shock. I didn't even steal apples from my neighbors when I was a kid in the village. You're a good driver and you know English pretty well. That's enough for us. But most importantly, you'll be faithful. You won't betray. You won't let anything bad happen to her, will you? With these words, Alex ran his fingers along Elizabeth's cheek. She shook her head and tapped him on the arm, but he only grinned. After listening to the brother of his yet present spouse, Harvey hesitated, not only because he needed to digest what he'd been told, he was also persistently, as if a mosquito squeaking above his ear, began to be tormented by one question: why Alex was so frank with him. Wasn't he afraid that Harvey might spit on everything as soon as he was on the shore and go to the police to report about the kidnapping and at the same time about the criminal case? Actually, there were not many options why Alex was so brave. First, he really believed that Harvey loved Elizabeth so much that he would do anything for her. But that one was kind of suspicious, because what kind of love, after a daring outright treason? Another option was that Harvey was considered a wimp, which if not involved in the case, then run home, cowardly tuck tail, and no one will say anything. The third option seemed the most realistic and gloomy, because perhaps Alex thought that if Harvey didn't agree, he could just get rid of him. Who knows, maybe he even had experience in the past in eliminating uncooperative partners. Harvey realized that the smart thing to do now was to stall for time. He should go back to the shore, talk to his sister. No, not to ask her for advice, but just to calm her down so she wouldn't make any unnecessary noise. Then we need to call home. Parents, ask my dad for advice. Jacob too. Harvey cheered up, remembering that he had a friend who worked on these islands. Jacob could tell him where to complain and where to save himself. The silence dragged on. Then Harvey stepped toward Alex and shook his hand. I'm in. What do you want me to do? That's great. I see you're a smart guy. Don't worry, I'll brief you. And by the way, if everything goes the way it should, Alex smiled, we're all going to be very rich. Not only will John not feed us to the sharks, but he'll reward us royally. Is that all? Asked Harvey when after about an hour, during which Alex had been outlining his crazy plan, the boat docked and he got off. I can just go. What did you expect? The criminal adventurer arched an eyebrow. That I'd put a tracker on you like a dog so you wouldn't get lost. Understood, Harvey nodded, fighting the temptation to punch someone in the jaw. You just have to show up tonight. At this address, he handed over a note with the time on it. Understood, Harvey nodded again and looked at Elizabeth. She didn't come down from the yacht. She sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her and stared out at the horizon. Harvey walked along the dock, stepped on the quay. Now the main thing is not to fool around, and the first thing he did was to go to the hotel, hoping that his sister had not yet raised all the local police and search dogs with helicopters to look for him. Yeah, he's here. Natalie was standing with her arms at her sides in the hotel lobby, and as soon as Harvey stepped into the lobby, she swooped down and pounded him in the shoulder with her fist. You've had your fill, haven't you? I was. Harvey was trying to figure out what to say. Oh, why did I have to go with you? I felt so bad. And you? I know you meant. Harvey closed his mouth, but he changed his mind about the ornate lie and instead grinned wryly. I met a hottie. Talked, drank. Well, spent the night at her place. So what? You think I want to sit around with you all the time? No, I'm a free man now, and since I'm on vacation, I'll have a blast. Having said that, he strode off at a leisurely pace towards the stairs to his room. There is an excursion to the local Museum of Folk Crafts. It will be in half an hour. Why don't we go? Okay, Natalie answered in a calm tone, and then to the cafe. I read on the internet that they have mango pancakes. Harvey decided that in order to make his plans work, he had better act like. Could he act? He, a little bit the same. And then everything would be all right. The main thing in all this fuss is not to involve his sister in any way. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, Harvey dialed Jacob's number. Come on, answer it. He paced nervously around the room and almost jumped when Jacob answered. That was great, Jacob said, pleased when he learned that Harvey had happened to be in the same place where he worked. Sure, we'll see each other. When the shift is over. Wait, let's do it at 7 o'clock. There's a cafe near the Mermaid Fountain. The crabs there are delicious. Having finished the conversation, Harvey breathed a sigh of relief. Alex had told him to come at 9 o'clock at night to some alleyway where he didn't know where anything was. He'd be able to talk to Jacob 2 hours before that. That would give him time to figure out how to get out of it. When they met, they hugged each other tightly. Jacob, as always, was asking questions, giving them news. They ordered non-alcoholic beer and crabs. Harvey thought he wouldn't be able to swallow a bite, and he'd hardly eaten lunch, but to his own surprise, the juicy, white meat under the crab shells disappeared just like that. He told Jacob everything as it happened. He knew Jacob could be trusted. Jacob seemed to be a sensible guy. Harvey was glad on the one hand that things had worked out the way he wanted them to, but on the other hand, he was sorry that Harvey had left the country, because when your best friend lives nearby, it's easier. Jacob listened carefully. He was serious. "You're in trouble," he said. "Can you trust me? Can you trust me and not be afraid, not think I'll betray you?" He added, and looked so intently, so piercingly into Harvey's eyes that it sent shivers down Harvey's spine. He nodded. It was a strange question, although the circumstances were pretty strange too. "I'll help," Jacob said. "Just you play along with me when I need you to." Harvey didn't have time to ask what he meant or what his best friend was up to. Suddenly, a shadow grew over their table. It was Alex. "What a curious meeting," he said with his trademark smirk, but his eyes weren't smiling. Harvey opened his mouth. He had to think of something to say, but Alex beat him to it. "And what, I wonder, are you doing with our guy?" "Your guy?" Harvey asked. "I told you there were 3 on the team before you showed up," Alex said. "Jacob is the 3rd. We've been working together for 6 months, if memory serves." Harvey had a strange thought. If an elephant had kicked him in the butt, he would have felt much, much better. Jacob. Honest, honorable, like a character in a historical novel, and he became a bandit. How was that even possible? But it seemed to be, and Harvey realized that now he was really screwed. He was alone. There's nowhere to go for help. He's at risk. His wife is basically a hostage, and his sister is still in danger. And is there any way out of this situation? Before Harvey could say anything, Jacob spoke instead, and he didn't hold anything back. He said that he and Harvey were old friends, and that it was a coincidence that he was on vacation in the same part of the world, and that they were working together. "A very curious coincidence indeed," said Alex, who seemed to believe and suspect something at the same time. However, he quickly returned to his former dashingly haughty state. Harvey exhaled a sigh of relief when Jacob didn't give away that he'd asked for help. I guess things were bad, but not exactly nightmarish, since Jacob didn't give it away. Finally, Alex said he had to go. "I didn't think you'd do something like this." Harvey couldn't stand it and rebuked his best friend. "Jacob, you're the example they used to set for the whole court, how honest and well-mannered you were." "Time changes people," he said. "That much?" "No, I'm sorry, but I'll never understand it. And how you lied to me, huh? Like, you work as a waiter or this?" "I'm a butler now," Jacob explained. "It's kind of like a butler on a luxury vacation. Relax." He patted Harvey on the shoulder. "I just have to go undercover," he finished, giving him one last strange look, and then he walked forward to Alex, with whom he was talking. Harvey walked along with Elizabeth, but they walked in silence all the way to the right place. The place turned out to be a dilapidated 1-story house that was squeezed into the street on either side by newer 3-story houses. Alex unlocked the door and they entered the hallway full of junk. He unlocked another door and the whole company found themselves in a room where it was cleaner. The light flashed and Harvey rounded his eyes as if he was in a detective thriller. On one of the walls hung several monitors. On the table stood several switched-on laptops. Connected by wires on their screens quickly crawled up some codes. "We monitor how the security service of our client works," Alex explained. "So we're running out of time. The party is tomorrow. The invitations are ready. Our goal is to get lost in the crowd and get to the safe in the office where the necklace is kept. Jacob will be waiting for us inside. He'll be, as you might have guessed, a waiter. A hell of a cover for almost any situation." Alex grinned. "I'll come as Martin Fox, an oilman from Texas, who just loves to party and throw money around. And you, come on, stand next to me." He led Elizabeth, who still had a frown on her face, over to Harvey by the hand. "Excellent. You're going to play a married couple, rich tourists from the United States. If anyone asks what you're doing at this party and who invited you, you'll say it was Wilhelm Wolf. Don't worry, it's this rich old guy. He really had to come and he promised to bring a bunch of friends. He makes them easily. He had an accident water skiing and had a stroke. Now he's in intensive care, so of course no one can double-check his information. Elizabeth, we need to talk. Harvey turned to his wife. Back off, growled the young woman. Oh, easy. Alex waved his hands. Keep it together, okay? I understand, sister. You are ready to scratch his eyes out after everything. But for one evening, you have to pretend to be a couple of lovebirds, okay? So, go ahead, rehearse, or do whatever you want. But just dare to set me up. Alex's voice was oozing with molten steel. And I'll make sure that if we fail, if they feed us to the sharks, you're the first to go into their jaws. Harvey nodded. He wasn't going to give up so easily and give up on Elizabeth, but it seemed that explanations really needed to be postponed. Tomorrow at 6, you will come here as well, except for Jacob. He, as a servant, should be there first thing in the morning while the party is being prepared. After that, we'll all leave together, but in separate cars. In the meantime, Alex took a rolled-up paper roll from the shelf and rolled it out on the table, pressing empty bottles on the edges. A plan of the mansion and the surrounding area. Study it, ask questions, memorize it. This goes to you first. He jabbed his finger at Harvey. I hope you don't suffer from topographical cretinism. No, I'll remember everything, he replied, and thought with a bitter chuckle that his old geography teacher would have been blown away by the fact that he could use her science, the way she had fiercely taught him how to navigate the terrain when the whole class went on a field trip to the suburbs. This time, when Harvey returned to the hotel, his sister greeted him not with reproach, but by suddenly being very anxious. Are you all right? Came upon him, and her eyes glistened in tears. What's the matter? Asked Harvey. What's going on? Oh, how awful it all is. Natalie splashed her hands and Harvey wondered what if his sister knew about his misfortunes? Then she would be in great danger. You know, today a tourist had her cell phone taken out of her purse while she was waiting in line for a coconut. And another one had her purse stolen on the beach. That's terrible. What a nightmare. In a decent place. No, it's impossible. It's all criminal. We have to be very careful. Harvey almost burst into hysterical laughter. He should have his sister's problems. What would her reaction be if she found out what kind of crime really lived here, and that he, Harvey, was going on a robbery for many millions of dollars? Don't worry, he sighed, of course, without giving away his current worries. I'll be home soon enough. Nothing bad is going to happen here, believe me. Come on, let's go to dinner. He really hoped nothing bad would happen, and if they stole his or her purse or his cell phone, well, he would rather meet 1,000 such petty pickpockets than a moment in the company of Elizabeth's gloomy brother. And Harvey also decided that it would be at this party, when he and Elizabeth were alone together, that he would have a serious talk with her about everything, because he had no intention of letting her go like that. The next morning, Harvey didn't want to get out from under the covers for a long time. It was a little bit like when he was a kid, too, when he'd huddled under the blanket because his mom said they were going to the dentist and it wouldn't hurt at all. Only Harvey was a big enough boy by then to realize he was being lied to. And now he realized that even if Alex was choking on his speeches that the case would go as planned, he realized that everything could go wrong. And then, well, the sharks Alex had named might still be the least of the threats. And what was especially disgusting about the whole situation was that Harvey realized the danger threatening Elizabeth. And even more nightmarish was that he didn't understand how to get her back, how to convince her that he had made a mistake. But that didn't mean he didn't feel anything for her. What are you sitting there for? Are you sick? Natalie, who had come into the room, was now pulling the blanket off him. Coral Reef excursion. I'm not gonna miss it because of you. It was weird to gaze at the colorful fish under the transparent bottom of the boat, then to fry on the beach because you forgot your sunscreen, then to try some donuts with weird fruit jelly at your sister's insistence. In general, to spend the day tourist style knowing that the clock is ticking and you're about to go to work. Harvey looked longingly at a couple of local cops spotted on the street. They would have known, but he held on. Are you going on a date? My sister whispered angrily. No, what makes you think that? I'm just going for a walk. Yeah, you can't lie, Harvey. Natalie rolled her eyes. Are you going to that hot girl? You know, the one you met here? Harvey said. Yes. He decided that this spontaneous lie could be very profitable. Maybe I'll be back late. And And I'm going to the restaurant alone, Natalie said defiantly. You can do whatever you want. Harvey waved her off, but then winked at her. I'll tell my mother what you've been doing. I'll have dinner, watch a show, some local dancing, and go to bed. He hardly remembered how he got to the right place. Alex opened the door and immediately threw the suitcase into Harvey's hands. Get dressed. Harvey strode into another room, like a closet, and pulled on the suit. It was a little tight, and the bounty around his neck seemed like a ridiculous element. He'd hated ties before, but he had to, of course. Done, said Harvey, walking out, and the next moment he was speechless. The scarlet dress suited Elizabeth perfectly. Or was it just that she was, like a magician, made 100 times more beautiful? The intricately draped silk encased her body, emphasizing her feminine curves. And it would seem that the skirt was just above the knee. The neckline barely opened her collarbones, and her arms were covered up to the bone of the elbow. But how seductive she was. Her green eyes were watching a wary, untamed cat from beneath her neatly arranged bangs. She had never worn such high heels before, and now, as Harvey approached her, she was a little taller than he was. Brilliant. The marvelous moments were ruined by Alex, who clapped his hands several times with his trademark grin, as if he was watching a theatrical performance. A beautiful couple. What an idiot you are, if you preferred the other one. No offense. In general, it was not worth dreaming that Elizabeth would forget the affair, but the fact that her brother reminded her of it right now made Harvey want to strangle him. They went outside and got into 2 cars. Harvey took a seat next to the driver's seat. Elizabeth smoothly turned from the narrow street to the normal road. Elizabeth, be quiet, she said, looking sternly ahead of her. I will not be silent, Harvey answered, and then he spoke about what a scoundrel he had been, about how wrong he had been, and that she had turned his life upside down, and so he, feeling infinite affection, was afraid of what he had never felt for anyone before. He spoke frankly and truthfully. He admitted that to forgive such a thing, well, probably impossible, but it is possible. To give a second, and he swears the only chance. The car passed the driveway, snaking between immaculately green English lawns, and stopped in front of the mansion. Elizabeth got out, tossed the keys to the valet boy. I need to think. She was silent the whole way, and those were her first words to Harvey. Only 3 words, but how much they meant to him. They were the main thing that gave him hope. He gave her his hand, and they went up the broad staircase, at each end of which sat a mighty lion of black marble. Harvey handed the butler, or what else could the man be called, a couple of invitations. They were let through. He took a deep breath and exhaled game on. Every step of the way Harvey imagined that they would be exposed. He imagined colorfully how the master of the mansion would appear before them, make small talk, and then suddenly, at the snap of his fingers, the broad-shouldered security guards would appear and seize them. Elizabeth screams. She is dragged away, and he can't help her. He is powerless and realizes for the umpteenth time that if it weren't for his vile treason, she wouldn't be here at all. However, the slowly dragging moments added up to minutes and nothing happened. The master of the house did appear before them, but only to greet them, to wish them to enjoy the holiday. And then James Richter hurriedly stepped aside, must be, as Harvey realized, to greet the more important guests. Great. Jacob lingered nearby with a tray of black game appetizers. The house is clear from the veranda. I eliminated the guard. What did you do? Harvey's eyes widened. He's just sleeping. Jacob quirked an eyebrow. I'm not an idiot. Harvey realized that right now, their lives depended on their every action. In fact, their lives depended on it. But he didn't miss the opportunity and put his hand on his wife's waist. I think one could hear Elizabeth's teeth gritting, but she only smiled sweetly at him. When they entered the veranda, they actually had to step over the guard snoring on the floor. Then the map of the mansion as in his brain imprinted Harvey turned to the stairs, dragging his wife behind him. Up to the 2nd floor, turn left, and there's the study. Shoo, Elizabeth said, and knelt in front of the door. Something thin and metallic flashed in her graceful fingers, and Harvey guessed it was a lockpick. So this is what she learned in her youth, Harvey thought, and swallowed hard, how much he didn't know about his wife. They entered the study, just a little lighted by a miniature flashlight. The safe was to be behind one of the paintings, and the beam had already picked out a portrait of some king. just what they needed. But then the flashlight beam disappeared because the light of the overhead lamps flooded the room. Harvey and Elizabeth turned around sharply. How unbecoming to repay hospitality like this. James Richter was standing across the hall, pointing a gun at them. I suppose you have come for the diamonds. Harvey stepped forward, blocking his wife. We were forced. How interesting. James grinned. I've never heard such an explanation before. Usually, thieves like to tell stories about terminally ill relatives. There was some movement behind Richter. The door to the balcony must have been ajar on the occasion of the heat, unprecedented even for the tropics, and now dark silhouettes were visible there. Harvey noticed it. Elizabeth, too, she pushed him lightly in the back, but Harvey, as if instinctively, realized not to let it show. This is definitely not mansion security. Look, you stole the necklace. Stole it. Well, of course you were told that, grinned Richter. I returned it. You see, John Smith was supposed to marry my only daughter. Then he changed his mind, and he left my house, repaying my hospitality by doing what you are about to do. He stole what Queen Victoria herself had given my great-great-grandmother. I had to return it, that's all. But why did you go to the police? Harvey asked. In general, he did not care about the squabbles of these rich people. He was just stalling for time. The official way was too long. It was amazing how Richter's hand had not yet trembled in the tense and extended position he confidently held the gun. He would have had time to re-hide it. No. Can you imagine the insolence? To try and steal him away a second time. But fortunately, now I don't make the same mistakes. Why keep it in the same safe? No, the necklace is on the other side of the world, and in the safe. The man shrugged his shoulders. So some stocks and some change. Harvey was about to ask something else stupid, but then the door opened and Alex burst into the office. And he was armed too. Now the focus of Richter's attention shifted from the unlucky burglars to the protagonist of this daring attack. I always knew it, Alex threw down hard. If you want to do something good, you do it yourself. Open the damn safe. Get down, exclaimed Harvey and pushed his wife down into the side. Now she took cover behind the huge desk. With a shriek, Elizabeth covered her head with her hands and shrank into a ball, Harvey covering her as best he could. And with good reason. More people burst into the room from the balcony, sounds of desperate struggle. Then everything went quiet. Hey, are you all right? Harvey was astonished to see Jacob leaning over them. Alex was lying defeated on the floor with his hands behind his back. Richter had his palm pressed to his face, and it looked like his nose had been damaged in the fight. There were also people in local police uniforms and some strangers in ordinary clothes, but with faces hidden by frightening and carnival-like masks. What's going on? Elizabeth asked pitifully. It's over, Jacob replied. You are no longer your brother's prisoner. Elizabeth stared around with almost frantic eyes, and then, suddenly, she burst into tears. Harvey happened to be there, and his wife was in his arms. He just wrapped his arms around her, protecting her, comforting, but gently, afraid that in the next moment she would rush away, push him away. But Elizabeth just cried. It was a very long night. The party was over and the guests were leaving in a hurry. Harvey, Elizabeth, and Jacob, as well as Richter, soon found themselves in an office, as Harvey realized, belonging to the local police. They were given the opportunity to all talk in private. Jacob explained everything. It turned out that he had indeed joined Alex as a member of his gang, but had only done so to stop him. Jacob said that for a couple of years now he has been working for a secret international organization that goes after criminals of all stripes. He explained that they don't belong to any country and are basically something like knights errant. Our services are used by small countries, usually island countries like this one. Your grandmother was right when she forbade you to read books about noble pirates and such things, Harvey said thoughtfully. I've grown up all right, Jacob said. Why did you tell me? Don't you have to keep secrets there, said Harvey. Theoretically, yes, Jacob nodded. But the thing is, I'm getting ready to leave. I'd had enough adventure for a couple years. And the paycheck, it'll allow me to settle down on a beach somewhere, maybe open a fish restaurant for tourists. As for my co-workers, he winked. You haven't seen their faces. Harvey nodded. It all sounded logical. Why isn't that guy handcuffed? He nodded at James Richter, who, by the way, did have a huge bruise on his face. Because he hired us, of course, having contacted the local authorities. We helped, let's say, to find out who Smith would send and to arrest him. Now Smith himself, of course, has some interesting stuff on him. He was aiming at me and my wife. Harvey was indignant. "You're overreacting," James muttered. Harvey clenched his fists under the table. He knew it was stupid to fight, but he wanted to. "Can't you do anything for Elizabeth?" He turned to his friend. "She's not. She's in no danger," Jacob nodded. "She's been cooperating with us from the beginning. She reported what Alex did and said. She's free. And so are you. As for Alex, he'll get what he deserves." Harvey sighed. Well, since this whole unbelievable situation had been resolved favorably, he wanted to get away from it as soon as possible, especially since Elizabeth had already gotten up and said she wanted to leave. He caught up with her at the exit of the police station. "We need to talk." "Wait." He blocked her way and looked into her eyes. "Please." His wife looked at him carefully, then nodded and walked towards the embankment. And there she took off her shoes, walked forward, and sat down on the sand. She stretched out her legs. Now a wave was lapping at them, almost to the knee. Harvey came over and, without thinking about soaking his suit, plopped down beside her. "I love you," he said quietly. "But it happened," she replied just as quietly. "But you, and you, understand, I would forgive a lot of things. But this, I realized that you could understand everything, and maybe, if I come back, nothing like this will never happen again. Except, you cheated on me that night. You broke me and made me new." They were silent for a while. A seashell with a sea creature on it washed up on the sand, and Harvey tossed it back into the sea. "So it's over." Elizabeth turned toward him. One moment and her arms wrapped around his neck and her lips covered his. It was a long, light, yet soul-piercing kiss. And then when she pulled away, he read the answer in her eyes. Harvey stood up. He felt strange. He could not believe it all. And with it came a clear realization: it's true. "I believe you'll be happy. You'll find a woman you'll love and she'll love you. You'll have children. And you?" "Me?" Elizabeth said thoughtfully. "I'll probably go somewhere. Jacob promised to borrow money. He's a good guy. I think I need to decide what I want in life. And then I'll be happy too." "And you?" Harvey struggled to say the words, but he couldn't keep quiet. "You won't write me, will you?" "Never. And you won't call me." She was no longer looking at him. Her attention was fixed on the horizon, where the sun was rising rapidly. "You realize that yourself?" Harvey nodded.